Pax Christi, in Regno Christi, the peace of Christ in the reign of Christ. Words spoken by Pope Pius XI when he established the feast of Christ the King in 1925. So what was going on in the world? What might this have been a response to? Well, there were three brutal dictatorships coming to power: Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany, Benito Mussolini, dictator and founder of Italian fascism, and Joseph Stalin, Marxist and dictator in Russia. Three brutal regimes coming to power in the 1920s. A very dark time in our history, a battle raging on the world stage, not so much a battle between democracy and fascism, but more between tyranny and freedom, good and evil, light and darkness. And in the ensuing years, darkness seemed to have the upper hand. The Feast of Christ the King, its actual proper name is the Feast of Jesus Christ, King of the universe. Pax Christi, in Regno Christi, the peace of Christ and the reign of Christ. This feast established in these words spoken at this dark time in history were a strong and bold statement of faith, one that we can cling to today when evil seems so prevalent in our culture, in our country, and sadly in our church. Chuck Colson, legal counsel to then President Richard Nixon, who pled guilty to obstruction of justice charges for the role he played in Watergate, had a massive conversion to Christ when he was in prison. He founded the Christian Prison Fellowship, and he said it like this: all the kings and queens I've known about in history sent their people out to die for them. I know only one king who decided to die for his people. Fascism, Marxism, Nazism sent millions to their deaths, evil powers seeking to possess and enslave the world to serve their ideology, versus the King of the universe who came to serve rather than to be served, who died to liberate us. He liberated us so as to live in his freedom. And the differences in those kingdoms couldn't have been more stark. And drawing that difference was one of Pius XI's intentions by naming this feast. In our first two readings, Daniel and John have visions of Jesus and his enthronement, his glory as King of the universe, coming in a cloud. The declaration of Jesus as Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, encompassing all. The one who is and who was and who is to come. And in the death and resurrection of Jesus, the war has been won. The victory is ours in him, in the one who obliterated the power of sin and death. And yet here we are. Here I am, battling with sin. We live in the time between the victory of Jesus on the cross, breaking the power of sin and death, and when he comes again in the final triumphant march, when evil is vanquished at the sight of his glory. One of the best analogies I've heard for the time that we live in and this ongoing battle that we're in was from then Auxiliary Bishop, now Archbishop of Guam, Michael Burns. He said it's like the mopping up period of World War II. In the Pacific, after Allies suffered many crushing blows, the war began to turn. With victories at Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Allied forces landing on the beaches of Normandy, winning a bloody victory there. This string of victories, beginning in the Pacific in 1942, through D-Day on June 6, 1944. These victories ensured Allied victory, and yet the war didn't officially end until the Japanese surrendered on September 2nd, 1945, over a year later. Victory ensured, but many battles to be fought. All divine power in the universe was brought to bear against evil as Jesus gave himself over, allowed himself to be pushed out of the world and onto the cross. And victory over power and sin, and victory over this power of sin and death prevailed. Yet you and I still do battle. I want to share some excerpts from an article written by Sergeant Thorburn from Stars and Stripes magazine. It was published on June 24th, 1945. And it offers a vivid image of that mopping up operation. And I think it has something to tell us about the battle that we are still engaged in. For nearly 2 weeks, they had been tracking down the Japanese soldiers in the hills of Okinawa. Sergeant John Kelly of New York City pointed to a knoll about 300 yards away. There's a pocket of them up there. 10, I think. I don't know. They've got mortars, machine guns, and plenty of ammunition. And the toughest part of it is they've dug in, and they have perfect observation. They use every trick in the book. They mask as civilians, sidle up and plant a grenade in a vehicle, or throw a grenade into the face of the first soldier they see. They constantly make use of American uniforms. There is nothing spectacular about the mopping up operation. It is the forgotten phase of the battle. Everything is passed off as peaceful and quiet. And that would be very nice, except that men continue to die in skirmishes waged in caves and draws and canyons. Today, satanic forces, evil powers, ultimately defeated, are still dug in, and they have perfect observation, using every trick in the book, lobbing grenades into your life and mine. And everything is passed off as peaceful and quiet in this forgotten phase of the battle. And people are still dying. And the battlefield is still a dangerous place. And the enemy fights on well-equipped and eager to take down as many with them as possible. We see with the battlefield what's going on in the battlefield out there, what the enemy's doing in our culture, in our country, and sadly in our church. But one of the things I want to do today is bring this home, make it really personal, because I need that. Because it's easy for me to pass over the beam in my own eye as I point out the splinter in yours. The splinters, maybe more than a splinter, in the bishop's eyes. It's easy for me to pass over the beam in my own eye as I point out the splinters out there. But the toughest battles, those tough skirmishes, are waged in the human heart, in my heart. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it this way: the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through every human heart, through all human hearts. Make no mistake, Jesus Christ is King of the universe. The victory is won, but we must never become complacent, because the battles rage on and people still die. And the enemy uses every weapon at their fingertips. So I want to offer 3 points of prayer for us for this coming week. 1, spend some time in prayer acknowledging and praising Christ, the King of the universe. And 2, spend some time in your prayer this week just contemplating his victory. Contemplating his victory builds courage in our lives to resist and fight battle with evil. And 3, invite Jesus to bring his divine power, all his divine power, with his kingship, to claim victory over that battle that rages on in your heart. Pax Christi, in Regno Christi. We will have the peace of Christ when we place ourselves under the reign of Christ. Amen.